do know he's a Hoosier. Arr! He's from Griffith, Indiana. Well, Highland. I'm sorry. But Highland. I know where the area is at. Being that I used to go to Hobart High School, which across the railroad tracks went into Gary, and, you know, across the street you went to East Chicago, Lake Station, what have you. So anyway, without further ado, Ken Scheeringa. We'll talk to you on climatologist.
All right.
I would recommend.
How you do?
Some of these guys, you know, they don't think they need hearing aids, but they do.
Is this good? Can everyone hear me or?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Speak it right into it.
All right. My topic today is what is a climatologist? And when Steve called me to talk today, he said, you know, we've had a speaker here talk about meteorology. We haven't had anybody talk about climatology. Are they about the same? Are they different? Or what really does a climatologist even do? So, okay. And he gave me a whole bunch of questions that led me to put together some slides kind of explaining what is a climatologist. What do we do? So I am from the Indiana State Climate Office. We're located on the Purdue campus in the Lilly building. And the office itself started in 1956, so we've been there quite a while, actually. I've been there most of that time, actually. So I'm getting up there, too, in years. I think it's important first that we talk about what really is the difference between weather and climate. Sometimes we kind of use these back and forth as being almost the same thing, but yeah, they're related in a way, but let me just take each separately first. What's weather? Well, I have a definition of weather up there. It's what's happening currently, what's happening right now. And I have some example questions that you might ask a meteorologist, like, is it supposed to be this warm in September? Is it going to rain this afternoon? Are we going to have any storms this week? Is it sunny or cloudy today? Those are the kinds of questions you might ask a meteorologist. It's very current. It's very, what's happened today might happen in the next few days, maybe happened in the very recent past. So you can see the timing is very important in defining weather. It's very much current, what's happening right now. And most of you are probably familiar with the meteorologist because, in a way, you see him every night on TV when you watch the news. He has his forecast up there, and he gives us forecast for the couple days coming up. And so most people understand the meteorologist and the weatherman are that's, you know, you're familiar with that. Now let's go to climate. What really is climate? And that's really the weather that's happened over a long period of time. What has happened in this area historically? And so these are some of the questions you might ask a climatologist. If I can see over there. Oh, yeah, is it usually this warm in September? Okay, I got my slides mixed up, but that is a question you'd ask a climatologist. How much rain have we had so far this year? Do hurricanes affect Indiana in any way? How often do we get a white Christmas? When we get an east wind, is that sort of unusual for Indiana, or does that happen more than we think? How many tornadoes do we get a year in Indiana? Those are sort of long-term questions. What happens in a longer time period? And also, we're looking at history, and in a way, we're trying to predict the future, too, based on what we observed in the past. So we're depending somewhat on the past to give us a hint about what's going to happen in the future. But we're always talking long-term, pretty much. And most people, I would say, are less familiar with climatologists than they are with meteorologists. We don't see a climatologist on the TV every night like we do the meteorologist. And a climatologist, you may have seen them more recently, in more recent years, because there's always someone who wants to make some kind of statement about climate change. And that's a really hot word and a hot topic right now is climate change. Everyone wants to talk about climate change. And so you will see some climatologists more so than you used to on TV talking about climate change. So you've had a little bit of exposure to climatologists, but not nearly as much as in meteorology. So let's get down to what do we do. I've got a couple pictures up here to kind of help me illustrate what we do. For one thing, we collect and analyze data. That's probably a really big part of what we do is we collect and analyze data. Well, where does that data come from? I got a sample on the left from long, long ago, probably the 1950s, of a form of weather data, day by day, for a whole month listed on that page. I think it's from the Acre Farm, actually. We have around Indiana probably 150 to 200 volunteers who fill out this same form every day. Well, nowadays it's more done online on the web. They'll go on the web, they'll put in their data in a form, and then they'll send it off to a federal agency for archiving. But in the old days, everyone used a paper form, and they'd write down their whole observation for every day. Usually it'd be like high and low temperature, how much rainfall they had, how much snowfall, maybe a few extra things in some places. But basically it was those few things. And at the end of the month, they'd mail it into this federal agency in North Carolina called at that time it was called the National Climate Data Center. It's been renamed since then. But basically it's a place that takes care of all these readings for the whole country, for all 50 states. And now even the world, they collect data. So we have we call that a network. It's a group of volunteers who do this once a day. It's still done today. There are several, 2 or 3 around Tippecanoe County who have done that today. They've made their observations, they put them online, and the National Center now has them for today. Another more recent development is more in the automated weather stations. We're sort of getting somewhat away from the old manual type data into more of the automated data. That's what the picture in the middle kind of represents. That's a sample of an automated weather station, where that again is another network, where now the computers take care of the weather instead of people. Not always as well as people in some cases, but we try. And so we have large networks and small networks of those. In Indiana, as part of my job, I maintain those weather stations. We have 8 of them in Indiana, which is considered a really small network, because places like Oklahoma have over 100 of those around the state. So they actually have a person whose job it is every day just go around from place to place to place maintaining that network with instruments that fail or need replacement or something like that. I do it all myself because we don't have that many. We just have a small number, and we have them at our Purdue ag farms. So that's an automated network. And on the right, once we collect all that data, we go and do some analysis with it. That's an example of a windrose. A windrose is sort of a diagram as to where does the wind come from and how fast does it blow from different directions, different speeds throughout the year. So what is the most prominent wind direction in this area? That one is for Acre up there. And as you can see, our southwest wind, since it has the longest tail there, is the most common direction that we have our winds come from. And you can see from the east, not very much. We don't have very many east winds, actually. But we have a lot from the southwest and west. So that's an example of a product that once we collect our data, we put it into a program or some kind of analysis and come out with some kind of answer or some kind of result. The reason I made this one, and I remember why, was there was a group in Monticello that was very upset about locating a certain, what they call a CAFO farm, which has a large collection of animals near the city, and they were so worried about the effects of especially odor on the city. And there's a big ruckus about that. So they called me to make this for a meeting. And so my job was to just present the data. I don't take sides on these issues. I just present data. So I presented the data so they could look at it and discuss among themselves what they wanted to do. But that's an example of the kinds of things that a climatologist might get involved in. So let's go on to distributing the results. Once we get all the data, we put it out in different formats for different user groups. One thing I do every month is I put out like a story of what the last month's weather was like. I just happened to pick July, I could have picked August, but I write a story and I put that online so people can read about, for the state of Indiana, what generally happened weather-wise during the month. Did we have storms, tornadoes, Did it hail somewhere? Was it a warm month, cold month? All those details are in that story. And it goes on for several pages because I do it week by week. And another product that we make is the Indiana rain map. And there's different colors on that rain map on the right, but it tells us where the heaviest rains were in a certain week or in a certain month. So in the month of July, you can see that there was quite a bit of rain down there in south central Indiana, parts of, well, just in the center of the state generally. And then the lighter colors toward yellow are less rain. And so I make one of those every week. I put those on Twitter, and I put those online so we can get access. Anyone who wants to know about what the rainfall pattern has been recently can go there and find out what that is. That's another example of an analysis based on the data that we collected. Okay, over the years, and I've been doing this for over 40 years, but I've come with a common group of about 10 or 11 groups, you might say, of people who ask me for weather information. I've just listed them there. So we've got a long list there, all the way from agriculture at the top, down to just individual citizens at the bottom. And it ranges from everything from construction is in there, attorneys are in there. They're one of my favorite followers, I think. I keep getting requests for, I'm going to court, and they need to prove what the weather was on a certain date. We have an accident or something, and both sides claim it was foggy or not, whatever. It's all different situations. And so they usually want some kind of documentation as to what the weather was that day, so they come to me, and I go ahead and I send them a copy of the weather observation so they can figure out whether it helps their case or does not help their case. One day I actually got a call from both sides within 5 minutes of each other. And I says, and I told them, I said, I don't take any sides. I'm a straight data person. I just give you the facts. You do as you wish. And so if it helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's really not something I get involved in. I just say, here's the data, and that's what I'm here for, just to give the data. Though I gotta admit, there are climatologists who do testify in cases. So if they want to hire a climatologist to come and testify about a certain thing, they can. They can do that. I'm going to give just a few examples of, from that big long list I just showed you, of what climatologists would do and how they would respond to these groups. This is, I don't know, some of you may recognize this guy. He's been on TV. He's been on Forensic Files. He's been on Court TV. He's actually a Rensselaer guy. He's based in Rensselaer. And his name is Neal Haskell, and he's a forensic entomologist, which means that he, when the police say find a body in the woods or something, and they want to know how long it's been there, they call Neal. Neal comes out, investigates, collects all kinds of bug samples, calls me to get the temperature data, and he correlates the temperature data with the bug stage to understand when that body probably was placed there or when it died there. One of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. He's semi-retired now, but whenever I hear the phone ring and it's Neal, I can't wait to talk to him. He has the most fascinating stories to tell you about what people will do to get out of being caught. It's amazing. It just ravels my, captures my attention. So we use weather data to put people in jail. I mean, it's just a fact of life. That's one application of it, is you catch the criminal and you put them away based on the weather data. Well, I'm going to tell you another story. I got this letter. This has probably been a few years ago now, maybe several years ago. I got this letter in the mail, and it had the return address on the envelope. And it said it was from Westville, Indiana, and it had a dorm as part of the return address. I said, oh, I got a letter from a Purdue student up there in the Northwest campus, North Central campus. So, and then I started thinking, I says, now wait a minute, that's a commuter campus. They don't have dorms on the campus up there at Purdue, so what gives? So I did some checking on the online, and I did find his dorm. There you go.
Jerry, is that your house?
So he lives in this dorm, and he was writing me he believes that he is falsely imprisoned, of course, and he wants to use weather data to get out of jail. So I guess it's fair play. If Neal can use weather data to put people in jail, then prisoners should be able to use weather data to get out of jail, right? So that was another interesting case. And I have had a few of these over the years where prisoners have written me wanting to document that so they can prove using weather data that they did not commit this crime. Good luck with that, right?
Work for him?
No. It was something to do with there was no clouds that night, and it was a clear moon, or it was not a clear moon, or something like that, and the data went all against him. I mean, everything he said wasn't true as far as the data was concerned, so I'm sure he did not win this case. Here's another example. Okay, that was from the legal side of things. This is from media. I get a lot of media requests, especially during severe weather. Media is kind of feast or famine. When things are going really down the tubes, like the drought in 2012, I am besieged, really, by media wanting interviews. They'll come up from Indianapolis, just one right after another. One time I actually had people waiting outside my door for the next interview. It was that bad. And they had traveled from Indianapolis or South Bend or something, talking about the drought of 2012. And this was going on day after day. And when it's calm, nothing's going on, you won't hear from any media for months. So it's really, on or off with them. But this just took up a question I received several years ago from a reporter at the Northwest Indiana Times, wanted to know something about, is it really a drought in Indiana or is it not? And so he wrote me this email. So that's just an example. And like I said, it really varies by the weather situation as to whether or not I get contacted. This is an example of another analysis that we use to answer this happens to be a construction company. They wanted to know something about how often should they plan in their design for a heavy rain to occur in so many years. In other words, if they have a heavy rain of 5 inches, how often would they expect that to come back? Whether it be another 5-inch rain. And so we have all kinds of charts that we've made and lines that we've drawn, and we try and help the contractors out planning their schedule ahead of time to plan in how many days they might not be able to work. And this is especially important for our highway crews, Indiana highway crews. They have contracts written where they have to finish by a certain date. They have an allowance for a certain number of rain days, I guess you might call it, where they're allowed to not have progress because they got rained out. And so they have to know approximately how many days they will be rained out. And then they use climatology for that, as to how can we plan best, to our best guess, so how many times they're going to be rained out and not able to work. So charts like that come in handy. I want to mention this program, COCORAS. Either the climatologist, or each state, by the way, has a state climatologist. And Deb Niyogi is my supervisor. He is the Indiana state climatologist, and I'm his associate. And most states are set up that way, and most of them actually are at universities. The state climatologist is. And so we do a lot of the similar things, but we do a few different things. But I would say I think every state in the climate office does COCORAS. COCORAS is a volunteer network, another network, we have a lot of those, where we just have volunteers of all ages, all backgrounds, people who just want to volunteer and participate in measuring rain or snow. And so in Indiana now we have actively about 450 of those reporters, so every day they report into us the rainfall amount at their location. That's how we made that map that I showed you before. But I just want to mention this because, and I am the co-manager of this network for Indiana, but I just want to mention is that this is open to anyone, regardless. We have school kids doing it. Anyone who wants to participate and report the rain every day or the snow every day at their location and be part of this statewide observation network. So that's open if anyone's interested as a way to actually participate in climatology. I thought I'd And Steve asked me about this. Can you give me just generally what is needed to become a climatologist? If there's some person out there, usually maybe a high schooler or a college student, who says, I would like to become a climatologist. It sounds really interesting to me. But what is sort of is the progression of how do I do this? And so I put down there a couple of slides to talk about that. First, I kind of describe a little bit about what a climatologist would do as a profession. But then the requirements for education is minimum as a Master of Science degree at some university or college. In these days, this is not back when I started because I did not see this pressure. But nowadays, there's a lot of pressure to get a master's degree as well, because you can compete better in the job market if you do have a master's degree and you want to get into meteorology or climatology. PhD is sort of, if you want to become a professor or do some research where you'd be writing papers or something like that, you probably should get a PhD. But I would say the working level, I guess I would say, of most active climatologists that actually are in the field these days have a master's degree. So that is very much encouraged if someone wants to get into that field. And also they should have, of course, a basic interest in mathematics and science, and have, if they can, get some experience with using statistics or GIS packages are really important to know. And then I'll just close with this slide. Where do I get work? Of course, it's an important question. Actually, there's all different levels that could use climatologists. It could be in the federal government, state government, especially at universities. There's a lot of them at that level, and at private places. And but if you're going to go into climatology or meteorology, it's really helpful for someone to get some internship experience, and it really counts heavily these days. Where if you're, say, a senior in college and you want to have sort of a step up on getting a job offer, internships count heavily. So in other words, if you have volunteered for a semester or 2 semesters, say at the National Weather Service office, that's a big help. Or at some private company, that's a big help. Anything that that person can do to get some experience before they graduate is a real help when it comes to getting a job. And there I list also some of the different things that they do. Some people are surprised at this, but there's the larger retail companies will hire meteorologists and climatologists to kind of route their products. Like if they know there's going to be a heat wave in Indiana in September, and there's a way that the climatologist can tell them ahead of time, say in August, that hey, we're going to have a heat wave in September. We got to move our air conditioning systems around so we have enough on the shelf to sell. And so retail people will ask the climatologists, how should they move their stuff around so that it's available when that heat wave hits?
Sure.
And so there's different things like that that we wouldn't think of that are useful for what climatologists can assist with. But I think I'll wrap up. My time's probably up anyway. So
Good job. Good job.
Right over here. Cup of candy open.
okay.
And is climate change really a Chinese hoax?
Does what now?
Is climate change really a Chinese hoax?
A hoax? Is that what you said?
Chinese
heard
oak
that.
homes that have climate cause changes within the Chinese oak. If I understand.
Whether
No.
climate change is a Chinese hoax.
With an
Oh,
H.
okay.
Hoax.
H-O-A-N.
Oh, okay.
More
That was in
Sorry.
President Trump's one of his campaign speeches.
Okay,
I just
I see.
I realize you don't make.
Yeah. Let me kind of explain, I guess,
What's
though.
the data show?
What way I perceive it, and I'm not very much into climate change at all. That's not really what I do. My supervisor probably does a lot of that, but I don't. But let me just kind of give my view of what's going on. Is climate change is sort of a loaded question in a way, because I was taught when I was in high school that climate never changes. It's a constant, and that's what you measure your weather against. You know, you got this normal value, it's just like a straight line or something, and you just measure the ups and downs daily around that as weather. And I think I've kind of changed my view in a way. I think I kind of believe in climate change, but then you got to kind of put, what do you call it, restrictions on that statement, because climate change to some people means that we're on a path where the earth is just going to eventually just run into destruction because the climate's just going to run away, and maybe it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and finally just burn up or something like that. We're just on a path to destruction. That's one view. Another view of climate change, to me, is much shorter view. It's like climate. To me, climate always changes, but it's in small steps, and I think it corrects. So you may have a period of time, maybe several years, a decade, where the temperatures are kind of like really warm, but then you can find another decade where the temperatures cool down. Now, maybe, I don't know if many of you remember back in the 1970s, what was the headline about climate change? The world is going to go into a global cooling. We're going to freeze. We're all going to freeze to death.
Ice age.
Ice age. And now we're all going to fry. So, and to me, I can believe that, because I see this as sort of a step, and it could be even longer. It could be hundreds of years, centuries. We've seen them in the climate record, where there's been like centuries of one thing, and then it shifts to centuries of something else. But it always seems to come back to some middle point. So that's sort of what I'm believing, is sort of, yeah, climate change exists, but it's not a thing that's just going to be run away and we're just out of luck. To me, it's like climate is changing all the time, sometimes in small steps, sometimes in larger steps. But I always see it flipping again back to something else that makes it more like normal. So. And that's not based on any real science, just my observations. So.
Steve? Hey, Jim, I'd like to go ahead and present you. From us to you, for coming in and talking. We certainly appreciate it.
Very interesting.